Thank you, Judy. Welcome everyone to our January lecture on messages from the self, hexagrams from the I Ching, and a warm welcome back to Dr. Dennis Merritt, Jungian analyst in private practice in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Today, Dr. Merritt will again address for us the intriguing messages from the self that communicate to us through dreams, symptoms, and the Chinese Book of Wisdom, the I Ching, and of course, synchronicity. He will discuss how hexagrams from the I Ching are related to the deep structural level of the psyche, including typology and archetypes. Dennis will illustrate how these deep connections manifested in dreams of his analysans who consulted the I Ching. Dr. Dennis Merritt has his PhD from Berkeley in insect pathology and control of insect pests. He has an MA in humanistic psychology from Sonoma State and is a graduate of the C.G. Jung Institute in Zurich. He is the author of 4 volumes of The Dairy Farmer's Guide to the Universe, Jung, Hermes, and Eco-Psychology. He began studying and using the I Ching in 1975, and in 1983, his Jung Institute thesis was titled Synchronicity Experiments with the I Ching and Their Relevance to the Theory of Evolution. So on the topic of unique messages from the self, hexagrams from the I Ching appearing in dreams, we welcome our speaker, Dr. Dennis Merritt.
Well, thank you. Can you see me okay?
Yes. Yeah.
Hang on here. It was nice to feel warmly invited. We've been really freezing here in Wisconsin, so it's been a very difficult few weeks for us. Since I put my books out, I think the last one was published in 2013, I've really been dealing a lot with climate change and damage to the environment in Jungian eco-psychology. And one of the aspects that I include in that is, hang on, let me see if I can get gallery view here. One of the aspects that I include in that is how we can use the I Ching to connect us to the environment by providing kind of an archetypal perspective in some basic ways, like the concept of spring, growth, harvest, and trial, that in Richard Wilhelm's translation is supreme success, furthering, and perseverance. So what I'm going to do today is present the most unusual sequence of dreams that I've come across in my 41 years of working as an analyst, because the person I was working with had not only an amazing sequence of dreams in a very sequential manner, but 6 times in his dreams, he either was told to consult the Jing at crucial points or was given hexagrams in his dreams. I only had that experience once in my life, but he had it 6 times in this one round of analysis. It's a very complex series, so you're going to have to bear with me. You're not going to understand it all the first time through, I'm sure, but that's why I'm glad this is being recorded and you can look at it again. This is the 3rd time I'm presenting this talk. The first time I was only given 40 minutes. And then the second time I was able to elaborate on it. And even today, as I was going through it for the last time, I had some new insights. And that's the way archetypal material is. It's kind of like reading Jung. You read Jung, you read him 10 years later, you see things you didn't see the first time. And that's what happened to me. And as it goes on with this, you make deeper and more fundamental connections and realizations. So what I'm going to do, the first part, I'm going to present these dreams, and then we'll have a question and answer about the material. Then we'll go into another part where we look at what I think is more interesting even. What are the implications that synchronicity is a reality? What kind of paradigm, what kind of ways of looking at the world do we have to accommodate synchronicity? And we'll see what Jung said about that. So some of the things that I'll talk about there is how we work with dreams the same way that we work with hexagrams. And that you will have gotten. I don't know if Judy sent out my article, Tips on Interpreting Dreams, but if not, it's on my website. And also talk about a basic concept that the Jing is one way that one enters the archetypal reality. Big dreams, the I Ching, near-death experiences, kind of traumatic life experiences, meditation, and so on. And then some ideas, and this is where I hope we have a good group discussion. One way I think about the Jing and its working is what Martin Luther King called the moral arc of the universe. There seems to be some moral dimension in nature and nature as we experience it. And through synchronicity, we tap into that. I will posit the idea that given the drastic state that we're not only in politically here in the United States, but many other parts of the world, and especially in relationship to the environment, that my vision is that people could use, from all cultures, could use the I Ching individually, also at the cultural level, and politically. I have given a lot of thought to what a paradigm shift would mean with an ecological focus. And then I'll discuss a bit about my I Ching experiment. And I'm hoping that there will be people here that will be able to help me on the experiment. I haven't totally designed it yet, but I'll say a bit about that more off later on. And then mention something about how the Chinese Jungian analysts are still not using the Jing in their analytic work. And I think it's because the Jing is more readily available in many ways to people here in the West than it is in China, believe it or not. Then after I do that, we'll have another discussion. So let's get started. Like I said, this first part is going to be pretty dense, and I'm going to have to stick to my notes so it's in a good order, and I have diagrams to explain it, and it'll be a bit like when you're in geometry class and you had proofs, and you followed the proofs through, and it kind of made sense as you heard it. But 10 minutes later, if you had to explain the whole thing, you probably couldn't. But at one point, you realize that, oh, this makes sense. So here we go. Many of us in the West were introduced to the Jing through Carl Jung. That's how it happened with me. I was finishing my, not finishing, I had taken my oral exams in Berkeley in 1970. I had finished very difficult experiments. I had all my data ready to run through the computer with punch cards, and was summarizing that data. I had summarized the data, and that's when I discovered Jung. And I was so taken by Jung, within 9 months, I was applying to train in Zurich. And by the way, in the introduction, talking about insect pathology, that's microbial control of insect pests. So you don't have to use chemical pesticides. It took a lot of effort to become a pathologist just so I could do that. But to finish the Jung story off, I was so taken by Jung and the worldview. Within 9 months, I was applying to train in Zurich, got accepted. And as they said in the introduction, I did my thesis on synchronicity and the theory of evolution. So in reading Jung, I kept coming across the mention of some book that I'd never heard of, the I Ching. And then finally in 1975, this is very Berkeley, very 1970s, early 70s, First Unitarian Society in Berkeley had a week-long series of events to commemorate Jung's 100th birthday. And the last event was by a Presbyterian minister from Oregon who had given up his practice, his ministry, to come down to work with the street people in Berkeley. One of the things he did was he cast a hexagram with them right there on the streets. So he showed us how to use the yarrow stalk method. I had a friend that sold yarrow stalks. I was able to buy them, so I've never used coins. And one of my Johnny Appleseed things is to do workshops and show people how to use the yarrow stalk method. I think it's much more conducive and therapeutic than using coins, but we'll get into that a bit. So Jung began using, and I'm going to go to share screen here. And let me get this up. I think what I have to do is get it up on my slideshow.
Yeah, you have to have it open on your desktop.
You're right.
first.
Do you see it now?
Nope,
You don't see it.
nope.
Oh, because I opened it on my desktop.
Yeah, but then go back to share screen.
Oh, okay. And then escape. And then back to share screen.
And then select that window.
No, I lost you there. Wait a minute, there you are. This worked in practice.
Right.
Hmm.
Do you see the window?
Desktop one.
You need,
Oh, there.
yeah, that's it.
You got it? Can you
But-
see it?
Yes, and you have
And
to
now I
play.
press play.
Right.
All right, this always gets a little tricky. Now I'm gonna have to move this further over without shutting down the screen. Oh, there we go.
There it is, play from start, it's all the way on the left.
Play from start. There we go. You got it?
You got it, you did it.
All right. That was the biggest anxiety in presenting is getting your technology to work. Okay, so yeah, this is the title of the presentation. And then this is Richard Wilhelm. And Jung started using the Jing in 1919. And then in the late 20s, Richard Wilhelm, who was I don't know if he was a Christian missionary in China, but somehow or another he got connected with one of the Taoist sages, Lao Nai Son, S-U-A-N, who has been ostracized from the old school. And Wilhelm sent him The Secret of the Golden Flower and later his translation of the I Ching. Jung was very affected by the Jing and it influenced his theoretical development. And the way I tell the Chinese is that I think Jung could have written the I Ching. It is so congruent with everything I think in that book. And this last December, I was a presenter at the 10th International Conference on Jungian Psychology and Chinese Culture. And that was held in Tsingtao, which is where Wilhelm lived and studied before he went back to Germany. So Jung wrote a profound introduction to the Jing when Carrie Baines, the wife of a British analyst, translated Wilhelm's German into English. Jung said that he could think better in English in certain ways. And then the Germans had to translate that wonderful introduction back into Chinese. So to get us all on the same page, I'm going to say a bit about the I Ching and a bit about the history, and then something about how one consults it. It's going to be very brief. So it's one of the oldest books in the world. It actually goes back to Chinese shamanism. And the shamans would scratch these images on the bones and then stick the bones in the fire and then read the cracks. Those images were the prototypes of the Chinese language, the ideograms, the characters. Then King Wen in 1050 BCE, while he was imprisoned by the old dynasty for 7 years, doubled what had been trigrams that were around for a while to create hexagrams and did some commentary on it. So the Jing has been developing since 1050 BCE, but the roots go back even deeper to shamanism in China. So one of the arrangements of the Jing, the Fu Si arrangement, is the binary code. And Leibniz, when he developed that code, it took him several years, but he was bummed out when he saw that the Chinese had scooped him by about, what, 2,000 or 3,000 years. And the binary code is what the computers run on. And so the basis of the I Ching is really numbers. And Jung said the purest form of the archetypes are numbers. So what I think has happened is that this binary code helped very tightly frame the imaginings and the wisdom that the Chinese sages developed. There were just many ways of working with these hexagrams. What is the opposite of what one hexagram is? How do they complement? All that sort of stuff. So I believe that the Jing is the most comprehensive book in the world, and that's one of the reasons for it. My light keeps going out here. It's going to be a little dark on that side, I guess. So what one does then is the simplest way is using coins. So I will go through that to illustrate it very quickly. So you take like 3 dimes and you give, or here we got 3 pennies, okay? You give heads a value of 3, tails a value of 2. While you're thinking of your question, toss those 3 pennies out and you tally up the score. If you get all tails 2, 2, 2, you get a 6. All heads 3, 3, 3, you get a 9. Those numbers are related to lines. The top one is called old yin. The 7 is the yang. 8 is young yin, and 9 is old yang. So yin is kind of the archetypal feminine, receptive, dark, moist. The yang is like archetypal masculine, firm, outgoing, light, dry. But when they go to the excess, and this is the beauty of the Chinese system, they revert to their opposite. So if you get too receptive, it becomes passive, or too firm, it becomes brittle and breaks down. And that's, like I said, one of the wonders, I think, of the Chinese system. So I gave a talk at the first International Conference on Jungian Psychology and Chinese Culture about using the Jing in the analytic setting. That was translated into Chinese and in English, and that's on my website. I hope some of you will have had the opportunity to read it, and you can ask questions about that later on. So let's get to the dreams with this analysis. Just to finish that off, those numbers then relate to the lines, and it looks like, there we go. The numbers relate to the lines. So the first cast of the pennies that you do is the bottom line. You do it 6 times, 6 numbers, they translate into those lines. And the changing lines, or the old ones, the 9s and the 6s, will change into their opposites, to the young ones, to create a second hexagram. And the first hexagram is generally seen as where you are now with regard to some important issue. The second hexagram is where you're going to be at some point in the future. So that is very briefly how that is done. Like I said, it's probably reviewed for most of you people. So to my analysis. The person that I was working with in this particular round of therapy was done with him about 20 years ago. It was his 3rd round of analysis. He had wanted to work this time when he came in about his anima. He was a very successful university professor. I had seen him when he just joined the university. This was partway through, and then after this series of work we did, some years later, he came in to help and move toward retirement. So what you may get in hearing me talk is dream recall envy, and envy about the complexity and the sequencing in dreams. But like I said, this is a very unusual case. This was a very dedicated man. He was really caught in a severe anima problem. He had a year's sabbatical, and he just worked probably as intensely as anybody that I worked with in my 41 years. He was teaching in a liberal arts college, and the first dream, one of the early dreams that he had when he came in for the first round of analysis was something that carried through in some ways to this round of analysis. He brought in a dream that involved him pressing his face into a spherical cactus containing a scorpion. So we related this to his struggles with his male energy that began at puberty and the hell and damnation conservative Christianity that he got from his church. So for many young, very conservative male Christians, one of the ways they assess their spirituality is the degree to which they can suppress masturbation. So this is a huge issue in Christianity, and Jung talked about that quite extensively in answer to Job in his analysis of Christianity. So the astrological sign of Scorpio, there's a nice big fat scorpion for you. And the astrological sign is Scorpio, and it's related to sex and death. So yeah, sex and death are two of the strong images for it. And after several dreams, several dreams later, he had a dream that set the framework for a lot of our work that followed it. He dreamt of a Greek Asclepian temple near the sea that had 4 pillars carved with wavy vertical lines that were holding up a roof. And the nearly square support slab had a round hole and a square hole in it, which is associated with hexagrams 1 and 2 in the I Ching. Hexagram 1 is associated with the circle, and hexagram 2 with the square. So hexagram 1 on the left, all yang lines, hexagram 2 on the right, all yin lines. So the creative is associated with generative creative energy in the universe, and hexagram 2 is about manifesting that creativity in space and time, as it is inspired and guided by hexagram 1. So in ancient Greece, for visiting the Asclepions, if you were ill, you did some fasting, some rituals, then you did a dream incubation in the temple, and you hoped to be visited by a rooster or a dog or a snake, animals associated with Asclepius, or maybe even Asclepius itself. And here's the thing. One of the main things that the priest in the temple had to do was to discern what god or goddess you were to worship to get well. And to put that into the context of the work here, is like his anima, the feminine, the goddess of the feminine inside at the archetypal level would be the goddess, as we will see her appearing in many of his dreams. That's who he had to worship and pay obedience to. So 3 weeks after he was in analysis, he had this dream that sort of provided a structural roadmap again for our work. And it was related to the directions and the psychological types. You see north that he associated with intellect, west with sensation, south with emotion, and the east with intuition. Soon after that, he dreamt of a journey to a place where an angel was to receive its wings. The angel is hobbled and has a twisted back. So angel, we're talking about the archetypal domain here. He's in his archetypal boss soul self, if you will, the way Jung talked about it. A voice said, "You must be burned," understood as the process for attaching the wings. The group enters a cave that leads, hang on here. So group enters a cave after they started to descend a hill with the temple of Asclepius on a cliff in the west. Then a tunnel leads to a chamber of black gold light, resembling a laboratory or an operating theater. Male figures, angels, wise men, and various sorts of scientists are working with the stone that has something to do with attaching the wings. The black stone, that's going to be used to attach the wings are under tremendous pressure, causing deep yellow and red light to emerge. 4 ideas emerge as to what to do with the stone, each associated with a direction and psychological function. The first thought associated with the north and thought intellect is that it should be given to Our Lady of Tears. The second, west sensation, is that it is a small light in the vast darkness of a painting in the Louvre. And there, if you can see it, that little light way over there, in which Jesus appears in a small circle in that light. And then the image alters. So the image alters with each breath. On the inhale, Jesus is holding the stone, which is also the Tao. And on the exhale, the Tao expands to form the light around Jesus. In this image, we have emerging of Christianity in the West with Taoism of China. The slide shows Campy's Mystery of the Passion and Resurrection and Assumption of Christ. And that little figure on the left is what Dave, that figure on the, between that figure on the left and what's up in the upper right, Dave forgot that this painting depicted the passion and suffering of Jesus to get to that transcendent resurrected realm. But we see in Dave's dream that instead, that psyche put him on a path into what I call Lao Tzu's dark enigma, and this will emerge at the end of the dream sequence. So as a Jungian analyst and a scientist, I noted that the male figures attaching the wings had scientists as well, not just angels and people in the humanities, if you will. Then the third direction, the south, the idea was that the stone should be placed inside of the skull on the desk of St. Jerome. So my slides seem to be skipping ahead. There we go. St. Jerome is the patron saint of librarians, which could be associated with thinking and sensation, details and logic. And the fourth idea is that, this is an interesting one, it is to be left in silence. This is accomplished by making a small fleck with a knife on the surface of the black-red part of Monet's water lily canvas and sinking the stone beneath the water. So those are the 4 ideas about what to do with that stone. So the stone under tremendous pressure is clearly related to the alchemist stone that the builders rejected. One of the many metaphors for the alchemical project was to turn lead into gold, to turn the heavy depressive stuff in one's life into something of ultimate and spiritual value. So another powerful and highly symbolic dream followed that added more complexity to the psychic roadmap. In the second part of that dream, Dave, he had this the next night. He was standing in a line with a group of non-affluent, multiracial people led, quote, outside onto a street in a scruffy urban neighborhood. Our Lady of Tears, a woman in her 20s or 30s, this is an anima form here, with dark hair tied under a blue scarf, is sitting at a card table in a driveway. The stone is on the table. The woman places her hands on it gently, and her fingers enter its interior. The interior is at once a heart, a coral reef, and the interior of a brain. Her fingers pass into the capillaries of the heart and the neural networks. She is seeking out memories and massaging the damage in rhythm with the inhale and the exhale of the breath. A couple of street people stop to watch. The massage opens new patterns in the neurons and causes the coral to change colors. Her fingers can reach all the secret rooms. One of the onlookers takes a cloth, a yellow with red and blue embroidery, and covers her hands and the stone. The stone is then carried down a hallway to the chapel at the monastery, where it is to undergo the second change in the process, end of dream. So the Christian monastery in the mountains is in the dreamer's home state, and it's a favorite meditation center that he likes to go to. Note that Our Lady of Tears, to whom all subsequent prayers are to be addressed, is associated with the north, the intellect, which I see as bringing compassion to the realm of the dreamer, strong thinking type. It reminds me of one of my favorite books by Hillman, The Thought of the Heart and the Soul of the World. My presentation in China last December was on this very topic, and it's an important framing for me for Jungian ecopsychology. And I'll mention that a little more later. I have to keep clicking on the screen. So Our Lady of Tears, and by the way, that conference was, the theme of the conference was based on hexagram 31, wooing influence, and the theme of the conference was heartfelt influence. So Our Lady of Tears, and this has jumped ahead again. Our Lady of Tears works simultaneously on the head, the heart, and a coral reef, which is a life-rich zone between the land and the ocean depths. I see the depths like the depths of the collective unconscious. Notice this simultaneous connection with the inner and the outer, and the personal with the world of nature. Hillman established that premise in his book, A Thought of the Heart, by resurrecting the Neoplatonic idea of Aphrodite as the soul of the world, and his attempt to get Jungian analysis out of the office and into nature and connected with nature. Aphrodite was the goddess of beauty and sensuality. So to look at the world with as the goddess, something beautiful and sensuous, that is a metaphoric framing that Hillman is offering us. Like Jesus, the healing rhythm is through inhaling and exhaling. Think meditation here. The street people in the dream remind me of the people that were on the streets in Berkeley in the late 60s. The runaways, the druggies, the people trying to escape from the draft and that sort of thing, the outcast in some way in our society. The stone that the builders rejected, the very people that Jesus was ministering to. So Our Lady of Our Lady of Tears, as I see it, is what Jung called level 4 anima in his scheme of the 4 levels of the anima. It is wisdom that transcends even the most holy and the most pure, that in Christian culture is the Virgin Mary. So there's something beyond that. So the prime examples for that are Sophia, the goddess of wisdom in the Old Testament, the Mona Lisa, that's where the Mona Lisa comes up, And I think it appears in Leonard Cohen's song, Suzanne, because he's singing about a woman in the first stanza. And then in the second stanza, he talks about Jesus standing on a lonely wooden tower. And when he knew for certain only drowning men could see him, he said, all men shall be sailors until the sea shall free them. Then he goes back to singing about Suzanne. So that connection between the anima as other and other at the deepest dimension, the feminine side, at a level 4 anima can be seen as the face of God. That's the Jungian construct. The soul of man. So the night after this last dream, Dave dreamt that the stone was on the altar of his monastery retreat. So here we're bringing in a connection between his Christian spiritual conservative background and meditation in the East. So that stone on that altar in his retreat, there's a man using a white hot flame to sketch or burn globe patterns onto the globe, not a physical world, to burn it onto the surface of that globe. The patterns have something to do with Thomas Merton's journey, whom Dave loves, and Dante. A mistake is made when the instrument slips and burns a hole through the surface, revealing a material like a viscous sponge. End of dream. So Merton was a Catholic mystic who incorporated Buddhism late in his life. And Dante's Inferno, is one of those classic pieces from the Renaissance that describes the levels of sin seen as Dante journeyed through hell. We might say of this dream that the process is harmed by using excessive yang energy, the white hot flame, in attempting to reach wholeness, the globe. Now, 6 days after that dream, Dave dreamt of an awareness of a connection between grace and the hexagram, the well. Dave was quite familiar with the I Ching. He'd been using it since he was 17. The dream locale was the west end of the main street of his hometown. We'll call it West State Avenue, a street that he associated with the bars where his high school band played in. And this was a military town, and they were playing to a lot of GIs that were home on leave from the Vietnam War. This was in the late 60s. There were many prostitutes, quote, women being used by the young males, end of quote. Dave said he could relate to them, his shadow side. Think of one of the images here, that Scorpio energy. We are dealing, I think, with Aries and Aphrodite, war, death, and sex. Scorpio energy. So Dave had a dream about a lost child. This thing is skipping ahead too much. David had a dream about a lost child, the son of a prostitute, and an undercover male cop that started out with a Mona Lisa face, who was looking for his origins. Remember that Mona Lisa is a level 4 anima that transcends the most holy and the most pure. So there's some connection between the detective, Mona Lisa, the prostitute, and male sexual energies like the soldiers during the Vietnam era using the prostitutes. So in the second part of that dream, that he associates the well hexagram with the stone and the cross, that cross from the Campi painting, that cross is in the west. We might say that when things get overheated in the realm of eros associated with the sensation in the west on the hexagram, he can feel like he's being crucified. He dreamt, quote, I'm on the western end of State Avenue and come to a doorway where Jesus is sitting on an old milk crate. In his hand, he holds a sphere, which is at once a rubber ball and the Tao. Think of that globe. When it was penetrated, it was viscous inside. There's a woman nearby who, like Jesus, is dressed in scruffy clothes. I think she may be Mary Magdalene. I look at the ball. I'm aware that each of the lines of the well hexagram is associated with one of the women I have known in ascending order from my first sexual encounter to the top line. The hexagram as a whole is associated with my wife. I am to meditate on each of the lines to discover which of them are changing. As I said in the brief description of it, I guess I didn't mention this. When you're reading the hexagrams, your most specific information is the changing lines. So Jesus says, as I am thinking about this, Jesus and Mary Magdalene walk towards the southwest. We arrive at the cactus, which has been transplanted from the southeast. Jesus, whose walk feels a bit mechanical, not quite fluid, holds the ball up to the globe of the cactus, demonstrating that the ball, the Tao, the cactus, and the stone are all the same. When he brings it away, there is dried blood on it, which I know is left over when I pressed my face into the cactus. That was from the first round of analysis. We return to the chamber in the west where the stone is on the table. Mary Magdalene takes the instrument and delicately carves the hexagram of the well on the outside of the stone. Eventually, there will be 4 hexagrams engraved on the outside. End of dream. I told you this was going to get pretty complex. So here is the ball. I just found something on the internet, looked like a ball with some lines on it. And this is a schema that we're working with. Notice the psychological functions associated with the directions. And he has moved that cactus with the scorpion in. Jesus and Mary Magdalene have moved it from the southeast to the southwest. And the ball, the cactus, and the stone are all associated together. So notice that Mary Magdalene here is the anima figure. That's where his anima's at, Mary Magdalene. She's the prostitute who was forgiven by Jesus and defended by her. That he said, whoever is innocent, cast the first stone. They used to stone women to death in the Old Testament. Also, notice that Jesus feels a bit mechanical, not quite fluid. A commentary on the state of Dave's Christian beliefs. How one moves and is in one's body, of course, is a very important concept in dance therapy. So when one has touched deep, painful memories in the analytic process, to be in the Tao, to be in the moment, is to fully engage the pain, as shown in the dream by the similarity of the rock, the cactus, and the ball that is inscribed in the Tao. And Dave said that in the following session, that he was getting back to Taoism and the I Ching after a recent long venture in Christianity. So that's what, at one level, these dreams are dealing with. Taoism and Christianity, and how do these things go together and don't go together. So the relationship with the hexagrams, grace and the well, encapsulate the analytic work. It's the relationship between form and process, the analytic work and life, the alchemist library and the alchemist lab. Jung saying that enlightenment is not imagining figures of light, but bringing as much consciousness as possible into the unconscious. So here we have hexagram the well, which is described as clarity within, that's that lower trigram, the fire clinging, and the upper 3 lines, keeping still the mountain, which is the, yeah. So grace, that hexagram, is about the beauty of form, which the Jing says is necessary in any union if it is to be well ordered and pleasing, rather than disordered and chaotic. It is about the tranquility of pure contemplation. This could relate to a strong thinking function in the north and the theory and order associated with academia. Also, a symbolic and intellectual understanding of the analytic process the clarity and beauty of form. But that is not the same as experiencing the pain and the sorrow of working through the psychological material. The form is helpful for providing a framework and a guide for understanding the material. That's like the Jungian conceptual system, if you will. Wilhelm's comment on this line, important questions require greater earnestness. He's not going to be able to think his way through this difficulty, in other words. So that greater earnestness is certainly seen in the hexagram, the well. In the well, the lower trigam is associated, the lower three lines associated with the gentle, the wood, and the upper is associated with the abysmal, with water. We can think of it like a woody plant growing and slowly penetrating the abysmal water emotional extremes in our lives. This is related, I think, to Our Lady of Tears massaging the brain, heart, and the coral reef which would be in ocean water, the collective unconscious. The water is, the well is associated with the collective unconscious that births and sustains us all. Wilhelm's commentary on the well notes that for an individual, the foundations of human nature are the same in everyone. That's what Jung talked about, the collective unconscious, archetypal, in other words. Everyone can draw, Wilhelm says, upon the inexhaustible wellspring of the divine in man's nature, end of quote. And Dave's anima as Our Lady is helping Dave tap into that well. The Jing warns of two dangers. The vessel must not may not go down far enough to get to the water, to penetrate to the root of things, or it may be brought up too quickly and break the vessel. This is certainly the case for a Jungian depth psychological approach to the unconscious. Jung knew how crazy the depths can get during his confrontation with the unconscious. A good analytic container is needed to go down to the depths, and we have many false bottoms. And especially in intense cases, finding the right pace in analysis is crucial. So the hexagram of the well then provided the framework and the container for our analytic work and a guide for Dave's active imagination with the 6 most significant females in his life. And remember that the well is not the water itself, but a man-made. The well is a man-made way of accessing the water. In other words, Jung's definition of unconscious, bringing as much consciousness, enlightenment, bringing as much consciousness as possible into the unconscious. So the changing lines, the changing lines in grace that lead to the well, namely lines 1, 2, 5, and 6, discuss the importance of putting in the work. I think I'm going to have to go back to that diagram. There it is. No. There. The changing lines 1, 2, 5, and 6. You start numbering from the bottom. And the lines talk about the importance of putting in the work and not living under false pretenses, about the importance of considering form only as a result and attribute of content, and being sincere about the humble position that one is in. The top line in Wilhelm says, perfect grace consists not in exterior ornamentation of the substance, but in the simple fitness of form. This is when you find the archetypal motif, the god or goddess or fairy tales that fits the analysand's process and journey. That perfect fit is like the container defining the parameters of the process. And Hillman talked a lot about that sort of thing. So Dave had a very complex and structured series of dreams over the next year of our analytic work. And I don't have time to go into the depth of those dreams, but highlight the dreams where they were directly related to the I Ching. So 9 days after the Mary Magdalene dream and 3 months into the analysis, Dave had another structural dream. He walks into the pit associated with his second cycle and his analytic work with me. And here's where things get complex. St. Jerome will be his guide. St. Jerome, the patron guide of librarians, is going to be Dave's guide, and that's located in that west wall associated with the Western sensation. It is the terrace of cages consisting of 4 niches, each niche associated with one of the hexagrams of the stone associated with attaching the angel's wings. The first niche is a painting of a sad-looking Friedrich Nietzsche, sitting on a stone bench with 2 naked female figures standing behind him. So now we're going to have to come up to the presence again. Here we go. Nietzsche holds a slice of a geode, deep yellow with circles of red and brown. This is the best I could find on the internet. It is a slice of time that includes a scene with his first girlfriend that he associated with sexual humiliation. 3 weeks after the Mary Magdalene dream, he dreamt of entering the picture of Nietzsche in the niche. His first wife, associated with the second line of the hexagram, is lying in a forest clearing behind Nietzsche. There is a broken agate in front of her, the yellow and black pieces reminding Dave of a tiger's eye gem. He cuts his fingers as he begins to pick up the sharp pieces, each piece containing a different fragment of memory of her. Then 5 nights later, he dreamt of a bunch of men in white coats, like scientists in the 50s commercial, working with a set of texts involving the interpretation of the lines of the well hexagram. Here we have science coming in again. And the tiger eye agate becomes a leitmotif in many subsequent dreams that he encountered with the 6 women, with the 6 lines associated with the 6 lines in the well hexagram. And those women were encountered in the first and second niches of St. Jerome's terrace of cages. So in the dreams, he came to realize that the tiger eye agate is made of very, very thin mica-like layers that he could look at one by one without cutting himself. Within an alchemical vessel, which appeared in many of Dream's forms, Dave realized that, quote, "It is possible to work on the process which will put the agate back together," end of quote. The scientist hexagram dream included a frightening male initiating type experience and an agate associated with his first wife, line 2 of the well. Dave then felt the presence of Our Lady of Tears. He realized he could, quote, "relax and let her fingers massage the neural pathways in my psyche. I'm also aware that she is not touching memories, but finding places where the chemicals and hormones that fix memories are released. Her fingers release the chemicals which then enter the bloodstream and flow to the places in the body where the memories are locked up. I follow my breath through the body, opening to the energies." So notice that we are talking about the process of relating to memories. It's also interesting to notice the connection between the feminine neurobiology and neurochemistry, the breath work to deal with the painful memories as they are experienced in the body. Recall that Jesus and Our Lady inhaling and exhaling in earlier dreams. Jesus was associated with the stone, the Tao, and Our Lady was associated with the rhythm of breathing, the rhythm for breathing in and out for massaging the brain heart coral. Dave was developing his ability to look at with some objectivity and feel into the micro moments of memories stored in psychosoma, using both imaginal feminine energy and conceptual approach. The scientists trying to discern the written description of the hexagram, the well. The breath work provided the means to generate the physiological changes that enable the memories to be discovered and engaged. So in the next dream, so I told you this was going to be complex. There's going to be a schema for the cages. And we see, so we just dealt with Nietzsche in the West, the two women, the slice of the geode, of the well, first girlfriend, the line 1, and this first wife, line 2. So that's the schema, and we'll be going through it a little more carefully here. So 5 weeks after entering the niche in that west wall, Dave dreams that he's walking away from it with St. Jerome, who hands him a piece of agate to carry as a sort of talisman. He tells me that the stone used to attach the angel's wing will have 4 hexagrams engraved on it and has been placed inside the skull that is on St. Jerome's desk. When I reach the south, it will be cracked open and released. The black stone to be cracked open was the one that was under tremendous pressure that was used to attach the wings. So as Dave enters the southwest, the transition zone between the realms of sensation and feeling, he sees niche 2 holding 4 images, each an element to be added to the alchemical vessel. And these are the ocean, the black rock, temple of Asclepius, and the cactus with the scorpion in the center. I am to cast a hexagram to serve as the guiding presence for this stage of the process. He's told that in the dream. The hexagram turned out to be liberation, 40, deliverance, and Wilhelm, with the top line changing. When I reach the black rock, I will meet my guide for the next stage of the process. End of quote. And this black rock referred to a dream he had recently, just before this, of trying to swim out to a large, black, impenetrable rock that was sticking out of the ocean and not being sure if he was able to get back because of the strong undertow. So that tells the risk of going into the unconscious that Jung fully realized. So in the hexagram deliverance, the trigram above is thunder. The trigram is above thunder. That's not thunder. So let me find it here. Yeah, the abysmal thunder was upper 3 lines, and it's over the trigram, the abyss, water. The arousing thunder, okay. The energy is beginning to move out of the sphere of danger. That's what the hexagram says. Just as a thunderstorm clears the air of tensions. Wilhelm says, just as rain relieves atmospheric tension, making all the buds burst open, so a time of deliverance from the burdensome pressure has a liberating and stimulating effect on life. End of quote. The Jing counsels to use clarity to forgive misdeeds and to return to normal as soon as possible. The Wing translation of the top line says one can finally dispense with the emotional ruts of resentments of former times, resulting in increased energy and clarity for dealing with the outer world. And what a wonderful guidance then and encouragement from the I Ching. So the hexagram for the future extends this theme. And that's hexagram 64, before completion, where we have the clinging, the fire, the upper 3 lines, and the abysmal water below. Wilhelm writes, this hexagram indicates a time when the transition from disorder to order is not yet completed. The change is indeed prepared for. This hexagram presents a parallel to spring, which leads out of winter's stagnation into the fruitful time of summer. The conditions are difficult, Wilhelm says. The task is great and full of responsibility, but it is a task that promises success. Because there is a goal that can unite forces now tending in different directions. At first, however, one must move warily. If we wish to achieve an effect, we must first investigate the nature of the forces in question and ascertain their proper places. But in order to handle external forces properly, we must above all arrive at the correct standpoint ourselves, for only from this vantage can we work correctly. End of quote. This sounds like a call for deep psychoanalytic work. Powerful emotional forces occurred the week after that last dream, and that led him to awakening from a dream, quote, in an intensely agitated state. He slipped back into a half sleep, where he stood in silence with Prospero for hours on the rock in the ocean, feeling the ice in my body, watching thoughts pass as they were being battered by a hard rain of half-frozen prayers. End of quote. So Prospero is a central figure in one of Shakespeare's last plays, The Tempest. He relinquishes his power as an alchemist and releases his hold of the chthonic Caliban and the ethereal Ariel. The opposites are brought together in the marriage of Prospero's daughter, who had been isolated from the world. So over the next 5 days then, Dave dreamt of an successful attempt to connect with the first girlfriend, and then a violent clash between two men. He awoke from the second dream, quote, with an intense awareness of the energy in my body, especially in my arms, thighs, and around the heart chakra. I opened myself to the fingers of Our Lady of Tears, feeling her fingers massaging my brain and the places that map the energy in my body. Gradually, the energy subsides. Quote, this is what I call Jungian CBT, using dream images to modify psychological states. So 17 days later, now 5 months into the analysis, Dave began a series of dreams relating to the second phase of his journey, having had St. Jerome's guidance through the first phase, through that first niche in the West. These dreams are related to, these are going to be related and connected to the South, the realm of emotion. So a fundamental transformation then happens in Dave's dreams with his psyche, with the help of a female guide surrounded by a pale luminous light that seems to surround the guys as the guys for Our Lady of Tears. Over a 7-week period, he is guided through 7 chambers of a desert tower of prayer containing different forms of goddess energy. Each chamber has its own patterns, colors, and associations to jazz and popular music. The prayer chambers are in the ascending order, going clockwise and spirally, beginning with the prayer of ice, then rain, flood, fate, wings, wind, and flight. The psychological metaphors then go from frozen water to rain to flooding, then a transition to the more spiritual realm with wings, wind, and flight. I can think one way is this is like the fundamental aspects of the lower trigrams in relation to an upper trigram. So as he travels then through the chambers, he is told to remember that the agate, that the prayers are to be directed to Our Lady of Tears. And all this occurs in St. Jerome's second niche, which is the alchemical vessel containing the ocean, black rock, cactus, and temple of Asclepius. The ocean can be associated with the collective unconscious, like the hexagram, the well, the black rock with the analytic journey of swimming out to the black rock in the ocean that Prospero was on, the cactus associated with male sexual energy in the Asclepian temple. The last part with his anima as the goddess to worship and to whom he is to say his prayers. The women in the chamber, he is told, are not to be confused with the women in his life. In other words, they are goddesses, archetypes. At one point, he is told to use active imagination several times in each week in the transition from dream to waking, focusing on the emotional state in the dream. So the meaning of the tower is related to Prospero's rock, and it is in the anima's domain. The tower in his dream has a well below. Tower in his dream has a well below, think of the hexagram, the well, and is open to the sky. And engaging the anima figures in the well will heal Prospero's wounds and remove the isolation supported by his genius and his wizardry. We agreed that discussing the dream about Prospero and King Lear, that the animas there were controlled and are punished, quite different from Our Lady of Tears, who is on par with Jesus. The guide said, "We hold the ocean in our heart, the seas we have left behind," meaning they have internalized the ocean. It's part of them. The guide then tells them, on the feast days, we release our hair. This could be letting the hair down, unbinding, freeing up. Then the guide says the first set of prayers, the prayers of ice, will be for taking back of the dream child, which would be the abandoned prostitute's child from the earlier dream. So Dave comments, the key to the first chamber is involved with the dream of Prospero, the West State Street Avenue with the two women fighting over the baby in my recent dream. We are talking about academic wizardry, the sex and death motif of the Vietnam War era, and claiming one's abandoned child. 6 nights after that, he wakes from a dream of being on a cold truck ride and enters an active imagination while being half awake. I'm in the chamber of prayer. 2 women who are praying are placing stones of red poultice on my 3rd chakra, and I feel the emotions which have been frozen for most of the week beginning to thaw, drawn to the surface by the warmth. The woman is wearing a white robe with silver and white with designs of icicles. They are very beautiful, and I associate them with the agates. Each is a moment of coldness, but each has a beauty that can be looked at. I hear the phrase, danger isn't death. And 5 days later, Dave dreams throughout the night he's in places where it is possible and necessary to make choices regarding what memories to deal with and in what sequence. And that I associate with using kind of the thinking and sensation function to provide some order and structure as he moves down from his thinking function. And 19 days later from the choices dream, he dreams that he had a dream opening with high emotions about a political and sexual threat from men, a girlfriend, and feelings about a woman associated with the top line of the well. I'm aware of needing to not name the emotion as anger. I remember the agate and focus on thin slices of memory, concentrating on the emotional content of the memories. This refers to the need of not to put much energy into dealing with emotional volatile materials. I interpret this as not becoming emotionally overwhelmed, of learning how to contain and transmute the energy into psychological insight. So, and then as the dream continues, Bear and Pig are stirring the pot. That's from an earlier round of analysis. Dave says they are working with the materials in the alchemical vial, bringing the crucified boy on the cactus together with Prospero on the rock. The Scorpio cactus would be associated in the tempest with Taliban, which is related to primal sexual instincts. And Dave continues, this is connected to the prayer of wings, and I remember the image of the rivers of the world which was contained in one of the goddess's niches. And so we might think of his well-developed intellect and academic a bit, in some ways able to cover up some of the traumatized sexual wounds associated with Prospero and Caliban. So Dave said, I think of the rhythms of Latin music and then of the jumble of the Miles Davis albums from the post-Witches Brew era. He was really into Miles Davis. And I know that I am to listen to that music and meditate on the emotional cross currents. And basically then Dave realizes, and there's later on he was told to reorganize his Witches Brew collection and realize that what the jazz musicians do is they play off of each other. When one gets stuck, the others pick up. So it's the power of music. And the floor of wings, he learns that it's not about the flying, but it's what you use to fly, and how the wings can either bank the winds or move into the wind. So it's the techniques, if you will, the metaphorically about the process of getting into that spiritual dimension. So these dreams then provide the container for him to proceed. And at this point, he was told to consult the Jing. We then see how this maps onto the hexagram 23, when he was told to consult the Jing. And there we have the hexagram for retreat. Withdrawal, that has no changing lines. And this has okay, there we go. Retreat, no changing lines. So the upper trigram associated with heaven is above keeping still the mountain. And the commentary from Wilhelm is the superior man shows strength, heaven, in that he brings the inferior man to a standstill by his dignified reserve. And a quote, he does not hate him, for hatred is a form of the subjective involvement which is bound to the hated object. We can interpret this as Dave in relation to the overpowering emotions in dealing with the negative feminine energies. So I noticed the time here, so I'm going to move ahead more toward the conclusion. And there are some other hexagrams, but at the top, the last hexagram that he gets, and I will read this part because it's after some previous hexagrams, but in that last hexagram, this is 8 weeks after he entered the first of the second chambers. He's in the chamber of the prayer of flight. My guide, that is Our Lady of Tears, tells me to remember what I have learned, and that it's not about the personal women associated with the lines in the women in the well. Inside the chamber, there is a chamber on which sits the alchemical vessel, including the cactus, the rock, the desert with the tower, and the temple of Asclepius. I'm aware of them as a sequence, the map of my psychic development. And the stone, which has been in the skull on the desk of St. Jerome, is on the table. And Our Lady of Tears, in her hippie chick costume, her hippie chick outfit, is touching that stone. She is engraving the second of the hexagrams retreat. And soon it will be time to move to the third niche in the realm of intuition. So he gets that hexagram retreat and so on. And that's about slowly moving and penetrating the abysmal. And like I said, I'm going to then move on to the last hexagrams. So 4 months after these hexagrams, then Dave used the images, the processes, and the advice from the Jing to deal with some emotional difficult material from his grandparents. He was able to distance emotionally from a woman associated with the top line of the well. And on his sabbatical, then 13 months after begin analysis, he had this remarkable concluding dream. In the second part of the dream, he turns to Our Lady of Tears, who is sitting across from him at a table. They cast a hexagram in his dreams with coins, and Dave remembers the emerging lines from top to bottom, which is hexagram 30, fire, but changing lines in the second and fourth place, which leads to the creative. Oops, there it is, which leads to the creative. So then Our Lady of Tears, now looking like the hippie chick, reaches under a cloth where the stone rests and engraves the hexagrams with her fingers, fire on the top, heaven on the underside. She lifts the stone and turns to a shadowy man who is holding a red glass toward her and squeezes a small amount of a thick, dark liquid into the glass. It is the umber. The man hands the glass to me, but it falls to the ground. There is a crevice at my feet, and the glass falls into it. It will descend into the earth, into the areas that lie beneath the surface. So this is an amazing result as a final set of hexagrams. So the clinging the fire then transforms into hexagram 26, the taming power of the great. So hexagram 21 is the creative, and it's composed of 3 yang lines, and it has incorporated the archetypal feminine, the dark, into its core. So you can see those lower 3 lines, yang on top, yang below, that would be the creative, but it has incorporated the feminine related to hexagram 2, the receptive, into its heart. And what it says about this is that this is what gives the creative its brightness. The dark eye has been incorporated in the yin-yang symbol. I'll move on. So as anyone who has grown up on the dairy farm like myself, I love the statement, care of the cow brings good fortune. The explanation of the judgment is, what is dark clings to what is light, and so enhances the brightness of the latter. A luminous thing giving out light must have within itself something that perseveres. Otherwise, it would burn out. It burn itself out. And this I relate to the yin-yang symbol. And the care of the cow is the archetypal base for really titling my books, The Dairy Farmer's Guide to the Universe. So further commentary by Wilhelm is, human life on earth is conditioned and unfree. And when man recognizes this limitation and makes himself dependent upon the harmonious and beneficent forces of the cosmos, he achieves success. The cow is the symbol of extreme docility. Man acquires clarity without sharpness and finds his place in the world. So the cow then symbolizes how to relate to the self in Jungian terms, and how Lao Tzu described the relationship of the Tao in one of my favorite books, David Hinton's translation of Lao Tzu's Tao Te Ching. And that 22-page introduction is, I think, probably one of the best introductions to understanding what the Tao means. So Dave's journey then with Our Lady of Tears has framed the hexagram of the well with the lines representing difficult personal relationships with women, friends, and his wives. And at a broader level, it was about intergenerational trauma. And the final hexagram states that this relationship with the internal feminine, a wisdom anima, will give him clarity without sharpness if he tends to it like a dairy farmer tending to his or her cows. And the changing line in the second place emphasizes that the midday sun to be like the midday sun with its yellow light. Wilhelm says yellow is the color of the measure and the mean. Yellow light is therefore a symbol of the highest culture and art, whose consummate harmony consists of holding to the mean. So Wing says of the old line, yang line of the fifth place, a true change of heart is occurring. Such a dramatic change is sometimes accompanied by deep grief. Yet with this grief comes good fortune, because a change will bring better times for all concerned. And that then leads to the creative, and that I mentioned before. In its full form, it's about realizing your potential and being the inspiration to guide one to that potential. And it says in Wilhelm, it perseveres in molding the developing forms and keeping them in harmony, conformity with the great harmony. It brings peace and security through its activity of creating order. So we had two thoughts then about what it meant that that vial was dropped and the liquid descended into the earth. One is that it was related to that flack made in the Monet painting, what to do with that stone. And it was to take a fleck from that black red part of the painting and let the stone drop beneath that. And Dave's association was that the geology, that the deep forms under the earth will ultimately affect what's at the surface. In Jungian terms, like the archetypal depths will eventually affect everything that happens in one's life. And I think of when I did my eco-psychology workshop in Canada, a geologist in the room said that he had the insight that the layers that you see on the earth are really the earth's memories. Those layers, the stratifications, are the earth's memories. So the umbra then is an earth pigment, one of the oldest, going back 2,000 to 600, 200 BCE, related to the Latin word umbra, which means shadow. And remember, it was a shadowy man in Dave's dream that squeezed out the umbra. And the umbra is used to create warm and earthly tones in artwork. And Da Vinci used it to in painting the Mona Lisa and in the Last Supper. And the color has been described as a paradoxical shadowland of hue, one that binds into a single substance the material grittiness of the world and the immaterial gloom on one that lies just beyond our perception. So the second thought that we had is that the elixir returns to the source. That is what the Tao points to, what Lao Tzu called the dark enigma, out of existence and non-existence, out of which existence and non-existence, word and image emerge. So then, by way of review, these are the associations. Well, I won't go through all of them, but like I said, you can look at it later on, how each was associated with as a direction, a psychological function, powerful dream images, and hexagrams that guided them. And finishing up with the clinging the fire that had, remember, Dave's wanted to work on his anima, and that a transition in that last hexagram generated by his anima, and remembering the fall of those coins, was going from the light. I don't think this is quite the clinging the fire. Yes, 30 to the light. Those changing lines then had showed that the feminine, archetypal feminine, had been incorporated into the creative, the masculine. And that would give that masculine the clarity without harshness. So this is, like I said, this most complex example. And here's a summary. It illustrates how a sequence of dreams in the psychoanalytic process can be framed by hexagrams from the I Ching. The hexagrams spontaneously emerging in the dreams convey guiding archetypal concepts and orientation for processes to be performed by the dreamer. They demonstrate the archetype of number as the purest ordering form in the psyche and the cosmos, and I mentioned that before. And the dream series reveal a link between the archetypal imagery in the Western psyche, Jesus, Mary Magdalene, Nietzsche, and Prospero, and a conceptual system that's at the core of Chinese culture, the I Ching. The dream series illustrates how core Jungian psychoanalytic concepts and processes, like the containing of the alchemical vessel and working with emotions, the anima, active imagination, and the use of meditation techniques, can be framed by concepts from the I Ching. And the dreams and the hexagrams presented are part of a gestalt together with the imagery, neurobiology, and music. And thank you. That is probably the most complex series and sequences of dreams that you are ever going to hear. I must mention that I contacted Dave about a year ago before I presented these dreams in China to make sure that everything in the text, because when I present in China, you have to have everything typed out ahead of time so they can translate it before you give your presentation. And Dave said that that it was the text was accurate, and he said he was totally on board with it. And he said, "Wow, what a journey just for him to read through the record of that quest." He said everything was in accord with his memories, quote, "but mostly I was just deeply engaged. I think the impact has been long lasting. Many thanks." So I asked him how it was that the dreams seemed to be so sequential and in going through going through those 7 floors in the tower. And he said, "Yeah, I focused before going to sleep, which seemed to work particularly well with the active imagination part on the borderline between consciousness, smile." So that's how he did it. Like I said, he was in an extremely difficult emotional state. He had material to work through with his anima in intergenerational trauma and difficulty with a man like him to try to be in a university academic situation where things like synchronicity and dreams and symbolism aren't really too highly honored. So that's the material. So at this phase, let's have questions about the dream material, not get into what it implies that synchronicity works, because we can go through that in another phase. So we've got not quite an hour and a half left, I think, so we should have plenty of time. But this was by far the most difficult material for me to present, and I have to apologize for having to read it, but there was no way that just off the top of my head or with brief notes I could have gone through it. So like I said, it's been recorded. You can go through it if you want to when the link is posted online. And like I said, I don't expect anybody to have followed through this. It took me a great deal of effort to get those diagrams together. And even today, when I was reviewing some of it, I had some new insights about it. So please don't be too overwhelmed by the complexity of this stuff. So Judy, let's open it up to some questions here.
Okay, so my understanding is we're going to do Q&A now, and then you're going to talk some more about synchronicity. Is that
Right,
correct?
if we have time for that, because like I said, the implications that synchronicity is really working, the implication that you can have a very disturbing subjective state and do a totally random process and get meaningful answers from a book. There's no way in the West, as I understand it, that could happen. So what kind of a worldview do we have to have? And that's what, if we have time, I would like to do some speculating on and hear from the group. But right now, just questions about what I presented and reactions to.
I hope we do have time because that's really that would be very, very interesting. And I am so glad we recorded this because I'm going to need to watch it again and just pause it and multiple times. Okay, we have a question from Chris or a comment from Chris Bernardo.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Dennis, for that presentation. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. At the end of the slides, you mentioned the Gestalt, and I have to admit I was writing some notes and not paying attention, but that perked my ears up. I just wanted to hear maybe just a few more words on how the Gestalt intersects with what you just talked about regarding the I Ching. Thank you.
Mhm. Yep. The Gestalt, I like the description of Gestalt. It's like you can look at one note of music, it doesn't mean anything. But notes in relation to other notes, that produces something, some music. So what I illustrated here is that Gestalt, that interconnectedness between, as shown in his dreams, the neurobiology, the physiology, the hexagrams from the I Ching, the music that he associated with the dream imagery and the hexagrams, and in those 7 towers, each of those levels with those anima had a particular music and colors and forms. And again, just the basic the basic dream images and the storylines. That's what I call the Gestalt, that all of those things together coming at one moment. And to add something to that, the way that Jung talked about the Jing in his introduction to the Carrie Baines translation is that the Chinese are saying that whatever happens at a moment in time reflects the gestalt of that moment. So the way they explain what is happening and why you get a meaningful answer is, yeah, the falling of those coins at random are part of the gestalt of that moment in time. So that's why you get a meaningful answer.
Okay, somebody just changed the caption language to Spanish. I didn't know that you could do that. I think I need to put it back to English because most of our audience speaks English. And maybe for the next lecture, I will figure out if there's a way to offer both. Okay, next we have Lev Krasnoselsky.
Right. Yes, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Merritt. Super interesting presentation. I have multiple questions. Difficult to pick from one, but just briefly, you mentioned that Dave had a conservative Christian background, right?
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, he was very familiar with I Ching, doing it from, like you mentioned, very young age, right? 7 or whatever you mentioned, right? I forgot exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So it almost sounds like, yeah, so he can't really do I Ching because, you know, conservative Christianity frowns upon any type of divination, right? So he goes ahead and basically does I Ching in his dreams. You know, this is like how it, you know, looked like to me as a quick summary. So my question, at any point, did you have a notion of maybe saying to Dave, like, you know, not for anything, how about we stop with, you know, pretty much analysis or dream work and actually do I Ching when we meet? Did you have a notion to do something like this? You know, maybe you actually did do on a couple of occasions just straight. You know, because for me, like, I don't do I Ching, right? Don't practice that, but I'm very partial to tarot. So if, for example, I had a dreamer who would come in and, let's say, reported 2 dreams with, you know, Rider-Waite Smith deck present, right? I would be like, you know what? Next time we do a tarot reading together, right? We do a spread, you know, you ask a question, we do it. So that's my question. Were you inclined to actually switch towards just doing I Ching with this, you know, guy, with Dave?
I love your question. In terms of his background, yeah, conservative Christian, but like myself and so many people from the late 60s, we got caught up in all that. At one level, illustrated by the title of one of Big Brother and the Holding Company's album, Sex, Drugs, and Cheap Thrills. And they reduced the title to Cheap Thrills. But it was about that mixture of sexuality, women having the pill, free love, all that stuff. And that's when he was playing in this band, probably getting stoned with his bandmates. And the I Ching was in the air at the time. So that was this tremendous period when he was really questioning his like Christianity, but that was deeply inculcated from the Christian background about the male relationship to sex and so on. And that stuff really stays with you very deeply. About when using the I Ching, why don't we just do it in a session? I, like Jung, and if you read my article on using the Jing in this analytic setting, I go into this very carefully. I try to avoid using the Jing as much as possible. If you really want to, if you're really working the analytic process and you really the analyst and the analyst are deeply engaged, in some ways you wouldn't have to use the Jing. You wouldn't have to have something outside. I think of it this way, that the hexagrams that are given to you and the source of the dreams and where the dreams come from are the same. So if you can work the dreams in this deep level, then you won't need the Jing. The Jing is kind of like a crutch. And Jung himself said after using it for many years, he could pretty well predict what his analysand's hexagrams would be. He said, I prefer to walk in the dark and see if the waters of the unconscious would support me. So the second part of that answer was, there we had plenty of dream material. And we had the particular images for what those hexagrams were telling him, if you will. The hexagrams are very generic. They're archetypal. Chinese, how many millions of Chinese and other people have been using this? But it's a little bit like saying my shadow versus a dream image and the feeling of what your shadow is about. So I just use the Jing, and this goes into that article. If I'm working with somebody, and most people aren't like Dave, he was very unusual. If I'm working with somebody and we get to a point where we've been working on a very difficult issue for a long time, worked with the dreams, kind of stuck. And if I were in that position, I would ask the Jing, if I feel that way about it, that's when I suggest to my analysands that they do it. And I have just found it to be tremendously helpful. But I did have an analysand who I thought used the Jing too much. And every day about all sorts of things and about just about every dream. And he would come in with the dreams and the hexagrams. And I find that it's as difficult to work with hexagrams as it is with dreams. Use the same processes that I outline in that tips on dream interpretation. So it takes a lot of energy to get beyond just projecting. This is not just a Chinese Rorschach test, projecting into those hexagrams. So I usually just kind of ignored what hexagrams he got and just tried to focus on the dreams. And in another sense, I had to give a lot of thought when I was designing my synchronicity experiment in Zurich to how you could design that system. And in the end, what I could come up with is that hopefully you can find some symbol system you're connected to. And it sounds like you're connected to the tarot, but there are many systems. Every culture had its shamans and people who developed these systems. So whatever system you're in, the question then becomes, how do you access that archetypal domain that is the structure of that system to get a meaningful answer when you ask for some guidance? And like I said, the Jing is one, the Tarot is another. There are just many different systems.
All right, great. Thank you.
I
Thanks.
actually have a follow-up question to that. What if you have clients that don't have dreams? Would
Well,
you?
that can be a particularly good time to use the Jing.
Yeah, that's what I was
And
thinking.
an example kind of related to that a bit, I do my 3-hour intensive. This is with people just call me up and they just want to ask a question, for example, about some real difficulty in their marriage. And I spend 3 hours. Dr. Adolf Amann, who I call the anima, the Jungian student, used the Jing very intensely. For 6 years after he had breakfast, he cast a hexagram, spent the rest of the morning meditating on it. So he was deeply involved with the I Ching. He was on my thesis committee, and he said he never saw anybody use the Jing as intensively as I do. So if a person comes in with, say, a marriage question, I spend about an hour trying to find out, is it a marriage problem, for example, or is it really a problem with your miserable work situation? What's the most basic thing? I show them how to use the arrow stock method. They practice a line, they generate their own hexagram, that's hour 2, and then I spent the 3rd hour doing it. So there's an example of not having any dreams. It's always amazing how accurate these answers are. It can be a little disconcerting to have the sense that who in the heck is watching me and knows me this deeply? You know, that can give an answer that's so spot on. But that's been my experience after all these years.
Okay, next we have Jonathan Paul de Virvia.
Yes, really enjoyed your presentation here. It was into some pretty deep waters, but there's just a lot of synchronicities going on with me. I actually analyzed with Adolf Amann for 4 years in Zurich back in the 70s. And today I was reading von Franz on time and synchronicity. So there was just a lot of things popping here, connecting. And also my grandparents were dairy farmers. So we have something to talk about. And I'll get in touch with you later. But what I'm curious about the framing. It seems like you have 2 systems here going on. You have the whole dreaming process and then the I Ching process, but there are many paths up the mountain, so to speak. And I mean, there's a whole incubation process, but what can you speculate or can you imagine or go into the imaginal realm with Hillman, who I worked with? What is being tapped into in terms of, is this the psychoid in terms of the depths?
Oh, yeah. Yep.
And yeah.
No, it's very definitely what Jung called a psychoid. And remember, the psychoid is at 2 dimensions.
Yes.
I think of one way I frame it, as you can tell, that, well, I guess you can't tell, but in Zurich, it's recommended, or I hope it's recommended in all Jung institutes, that you have one symbol system you really can relate to, whether it's fairy tales or myths or I Ching or whatever, and really get into that. So I get a lot out of the I Ching and the structural thing. So one way that the Chinese talk about it is in your 6 lines, the humans are like the 3rd and the 4th, right? The lower 2 are like the body and the physiology and so on. The upper 2 are the spiritual. I think of lines 2 as being the psychoid dimension between the human and the human consciousness and the purely physiological, and line 5 as being the psychoid between, again, the human and the purely spiritual. So I think of the psychoid as being in those 2 dimensions. Did you say you worked with Hillman?
Yeah, Hillman. Yeah, I
Lucky
wrote
guy.
some of his books back in 74, 75 when he was in Zurich. Actually, I went there in October of 70.
Wow.
Yeah, it was quite intense at the time. I'm also curious in terms of, I mean, this is really good. I like the way, the sense of framing. What is going on here? Also, I'm curious in terms of other symbol systems that are happening now in terms of sacred geometry, how that might play into number, and it gets into the core sense of number. But then also what's going on in terms of the UFO phenomena and the UAP phenomena and the synchronicities and the paranormal effects that are going on with that. And if there might be a way, you know, dreams, people are having telepathic communication with non-human intelligence. Where is that all leading us? And I know that's a rather open question, but I think we can talk later.
We threw a lot of big things there, but I'll quickly try to answer them. One is sacred geometry, of course. Jung, what comes to mind there is Jung commenting on Mountain Lake, this Native American, wasn't a medicine man, but representative of a
Sioux.
Indian.
Yeah.
And Vine Deloria Jr. really picked up on that deep connection that Jung made with this man, and he said that what you see in Jung's writings and everything is really Jung being trapped in kind of his Western system, but things in the vision seminars and the things he said like this really showed that at some deeper level, Jung was like a shaman and is deeply connected with the indigenous. And two examples Jung used of like highly evolved people, like the end of the analytic process, were the Egyptian priests and Mountain Lake. So the Egyptians are the ones that developed sacred geometry, as I understand it, picked up by the Pythagoreans.
Yes.
And lost in the West was the sacred dimension, and all we have is a
squared plus b
Pythagorean
squared
theorem and all that sort of stuff. And that points to the fundamental problem in the West as Jung saw it. We do not have a sense of the numinous at all levels, and including, of course, our educational system. Heaven forbid we talk about the sacred in the educational system. And that is what I see as part of the paradigm shift that we need, is that numinous has to be incorporated. So sacred geometry, UFOs. Yeah, Jung commented on UFOs, and his take on it was that was at the collective level an indication that there was so much tension and anxiety in society that psyche was like maybe producing these images of the circles and so on as wholeness. And the fact that this is occurring now, we had this Senate testimony, it's really moving into another dimension, a very interesting dimension. So I think we have to look at a relook at what Jung said about the UFO phenomena. But boy, I'm afraid to say that as an environmentalist, I've been one since 1958. And after writing my books, I've been focusing, like I said, on climate change and so on. I don't see much hope for our species.
Well, I would disagree. I think you've tapped into the well. I think there is a deep regenerative capacity that we are missing if we get out of the electromagnetic field. But this is a whole other conversation. I greatly appreciate it, and I'm glad we connected, and I'll be in touch.
But what I'll say about that is the main concept that Jung has that I use, especially in talking to young people. I'm really concerned about young people have some way of archetypally framing how we got into this mess with the environment and some archetypal framework for how to go forward. But the main concept I use is the paradigm shift. Back in 1940, Jung coined the terms New Age, Age of Aquarius, for the paradigm shift. He said, had to come in the West and countries affected by the West. And that's what I emphasize. It has to be that major. So that's how I can talk about how bad it is by saying it's this bad. Therefore, we need something major. And this is the dimension I think we have to think of, paradigm shift.
Well, you know, I totally agree with you, but you know what a paradigm shift is?
What?
4 nickels.
4 nickels.
Yes,
How's that?
paradigm shift.
Oh,
It's
all right. I missed that one.
okay.
Thanks for your
Yeah.
comments and questions.
Well,
here.
thank you for your presentation. Look forward to hearing more.
We have, since there's nobody else, we'll repeat with Chris Bernardo, who's got his hand raised.
Thank
Go
you
ahead.
again. I was really impressed by the schema, the diagrams of the schema of your analysis, and I'm not a therapist or an analyst. I was just curious if you're willing to talk a little bit about your process for developing the schema, or if that's standard for a Jungian analyst, or if you created that, or if that's too diffuse, maybe I can dial it in.
No, that see, he was deeply involved and aware of the schema. And like I said, he was doing a lot of active imagination, meditation. He was on a retreat. This was his third round of Jungian analysis. He was very familiar with the I Ching and so on. And then he would focus on just where he was in the process and what the hexagrams were saying as they emerged over the analytic work. So it was fairly firmly entrenched in him. It took me hours of going through all of his dreams for this round of analysis and putting together that diagram so I could understand it. And I even made a mistake in one of those images. The last image, the image at the top for the hexagram, has to be the creative. But in one of those, I think it was St. Jerome's diagrams, I wanted to correct it. I forgot that I was supposed to correct it before this presentation, and I haven't. So stick to the vast schema. But like I said, this is by far the most complex series of dreams that I have worked with. And I, even now, am getting insights about what that schema means. So don't think that this is the way most analysis goes. Most of the schema that we have archetypally, the most general thing is to know what fairy tales or myths or archetypal dimension paradigm the person is working with. Like if you're working, a lot of times when you're working with women, many of them, you can see that it's really their Cinderella archetype that they're living out. So it's important for them, for example, to know, oh, am I Cinderella? Just after she planted the twig and is starting to weep, to begin to weep after her mother's death, or is she Cinderella after she's gone to the first ball and then has to kind of give it all up again and go back into the pits? That's a schema that most Jungian analysts can follow, but nothing nearly as complex as what I presented.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, we had a woman, but she disappeared. Juliet, raise your hand if you want to. Ah, she's back. Okay. Juliet Maroney, go ahead.
Thank you. Dr. Merritt, I really enjoyed this. I'm a nurse, a busy dreaming nurse, but after the last question, I really felt I wanted to say what I saw from the images. I had a hard time following, but I did absorb all the images. And there was a couple of images. The sagittal slice of the agate looked very much like an illuminated agate looked like the sagittal slice of an illuminated brain.
I like that.
The geode also looked like a highly evolved, like an evolved stone, like philosopher's stone. A geode would be an evolved stone. I don't know if sort of like a lotus coming from a mud, that type of a flower on a plant. And that they're also got that kind of feeling from looking at the Grand Canyon. And what I felt from that was your two minds, the analyst and the analyst's minds coming together in such a beautifully, highly genius, I don't know what other word to use, you know, uncovering all these images. And it was just beautiful to see that. And that also you know, though the I Ching is a bunch of lines, the lines are very, I mean, it's all talking about the earth, right? And it does have the air and the fire masculine, maybe the thunder's masculine, but a lot of the symbols that your analyst brought up were feminine. The stones and I can't even remember, but I was feeling it through there. I just saw a lot of the feminine and how it's, yeah. I don't know if that's a question, but I'd love for you to, if you have anything to respond with.
No, I sure do. And in responding, I can pick up on a question that Judy raised. When I started doing therapy, basically what happened, I got accepted in Zurich, and then I was at work. I was able to get into an experimental program at Sonoma State to work on a master's in humanistic psychology, clinical option, and had a friend who was working in an outpatient mental health clinic. So here's me with no background in psychology, never thought of being a therapist, but I was just so taken by Jung and that system, that thing of that hexagram grace. I said, oh my gosh, here's a way you can bring together science, spirituality, Native American spirituality, and so on. And I haven't seen anything that comes close to that from the Jungian system, if you will. And then after I applied to Zurich, the dream told me that I'd been accepted. So that's what I went with. So here I get a field placement. All I knew how to do was work with dreams and the I Ching. So one of my patients was a nurse, very competent nurse, only needed 4 hours of sleep a night. But she'd gone through a divorce. The husband was using the child, a way of getting back at her, and she was really distraught. So within the first or second session, I suggested she might use the I Ching. And she did, and she got these miserable hexagrams, like wounding of the bright. And she was so elated because that's how I feel. And again, when you think of the implications, it's like something out there at some profound level sees you. Maybe a Christian would say like God sees me or whatever. But here's an example from the East of something there sees you. You can call it whatever you want to. And then over the period of our work, we only had about 6 or 7 sessions. And when you're going through a divorce like that, things change so drastically and quickly that you can ask a question like from one day to the next. Because usually you got a difficult situation, you get an answer that's relevant for some time. And if you go and ask the same question too soon, hexagram 4 warns against that. You're not trusting the sage. It's not going to answer you. But over our period of work, she asked the Jing, and she just got tremendous guidance and support. And then after about 6 or 7 sessions, she felt she was able to do it on her own. And she says, well, what should I do if I want to come back again? And I thought for a minute, and I said, well, think about it. And then you might ask the Jing. And about a year later, just before I was about to finish my field placement, I came into the clinic and there was a call from her about a session, but then she never called back. So I like to think she consulted the Jing and got her answer. It is, I call it the ultimate self-help tool. Yeah. And with regard to your sense about the geode, yes, I like that. And remember, in the geode, when he started out with Nietzsche, there was this fractured agate, and he cut his fingers on it. But what he learned in the process was how to relate to that emotionally laden stuff. And that's like each of those layers laid down in the geode. And then on the macro scale, it's like those geological layers in the Grand Canyon. That's at the macro, but at the micro scale, it's that geode. So he learned how to be in the Tao is to relate to the traumatizing moments that each of those layers represented, and not be overwhelmed by it, but to have like the alchemical vessel, which included the dreams and our analytic work and the hexagrams and so on as a container to be able to relate to those moments. And the last thing about and you comment about the analyst analysis. When you do this kind of work, what is of utmost importance is the sense of trust between the analyst and the analyst. You can't do this kind of stuff without there being some kind of deep connection. And I think of what Jung said about the analyst versus the analyst. He said being the analyst is like being in the tub with your analysis, but the analyst has 1 foot out of the tub. So you're in there, you're engaged with it, deeply engaged. And that was what's so different from Freud's initial idea, that the analyst, by having the patient lie down and the analyst sitting in a chair behind the patient's head so he couldn't see him, so that anything the patient said about the analyst was also all obviously projection. From the beginning, Jung said, no, that you have to be engaged and the analyses are affecting you. And when you do get stuck, and this is how I, touch wood, have had to use the Jing on occasion, I turn to the Jing to say, what the hell is going on here? And it's very helpful. One more thing about the I Ching and the Earth. Yes. In my, where is this? In my volume 4, Land, Weather, Seasons, Insects. Yeah, under the chapter Seasons of the Soul, I use a lot of things from the I Ching to frame the presentation about our connection with nature. And I summarize that in a video that you can have access to. Send me an email because it's a private thing, but I illustrated that material from that chapter in this video.
Thank you.
Thanks for the question.
Yeah, thank you. Enjoyed it so much.
Okay, next we have Shanti Mayberry.
Hi, Dennis. Thank you so much for this presentation. And I just wanted to share that I also was introduced to Jung and the I Ching at Berkeley in the late 60s. And then I went to live in London, and I went into analysis with Gerhard Adler, who was
Oh my goodness.
who was the translator of and the editor of Jung's collected works. And during the course of over 2 years of working with him, we alternated dream work with painting the dreams and talking about the paintings and analyzing the dreams and so on, with studying the I Ching, because he felt that the I Ching was the way of teaching about synchronicity. So the I Ching became a really important part of our work together. And we went from using yarrow stalks, which I had gathered myself on Hampstead Heath, to the coins, and finally just to opening the I Ching in a meditative moment, as an example also of synchronicity. And I really liked that rhythm. And as you said, the I Ching, the hexagrams, and the dreams really do come from the same place. So it was an incredible initiation, really, into Jungian therapy. And I wondered if you wanted to comment on that kind of a rhythm.
Well, I like that rhythm, and every analyst develops their own way of working with the symbolic and the archetypal domain. And that sounds beautiful to me. It reminds me of Christians who will just open the Bible randomly when they have an issue or a question. It's those random, uncontrolled processes. That's what we're talking about. That allows us to enter. And one of the things I'll just comment about what you said here. This is one of, I think, the really important contributions of Jungian psychology to the world of psychology. It is something that gets Jung dismissed as a mystic, one of the common ways he's dismissed, because it's so irrational. There's nothing in our Western system to describe it. But as Jungians, we say, okay, well, we're Jungians and we can talk about it and we can use it. But just to think of, the implications of those dreams, and this is from my many years of using it. It's not my belief that it works; it's my experience that it works. And when you think of the interview face to face, Jung was asked if he believed in God, and without pausing, he said, "I don't believe in God. I know." And then later on, he said, "I can't believe in anything. I have to have a reason to think something is true." So I don't believe that the I Ching works. I have reasons for all these years of experience that it does work, and it's not just a Rorschach test. So the implications of that is, boy, there's some other dimension to our human experience that none of the other psychologies talk about. But the way Jung said it, it's the most important human dimension to be able to access that realm. And these things like the Jing or meditation or chanting, these are the mediums. These are all ways of accessing those realms, which of course is what the shamans did. And of course, the I Ching goes back to shamanism. But lucky
Yes.
woman to be able to work with Adler, one of the big names. And here we have a man who worked with Yeoman. So
Yeah, it was really a blessing. And I still have the I Ching from then, which
there you go.
I regard as a very dear friend and very close dear friend. And I still consult it by meditating and then opening it. And it's always right on.
And that's an important thing that you said there. My feeling from Wilhelm and the other two translations I use, Carol Anthony's third edition of the I Ching and the I Ching workbook, is that if the Jing were like a person, it would be, however we want to think about it, but for me, it would be like a dear uncle who I know loves me and is concerned about me and can give me good advice, or a grandfather. And I think I've done a lot of the Lakota Sioux ceremonies. The word they use is Tankashala, and it's grandfather. So it's like kind of putting a personal feel and a sense on that powerful spiritual realm. And so those translations, some of the translations I've seen, they talk about evil and this and that and inferior people, but that to me is not in the truest spirit of the Jing, because in the Jing, I think that before things get too far out of balance, like in Christianity, we tend to push the good and the bad to the extremes, which are good and evil, and then we can't bring them together in our culture. But I don't think the Chinese have that much trouble with it because of the yin yang symbol. It's like all yang is not what we're aiming for. All yin is what we're not aiming for. It's that symbol where the yang has the at its core the yin has at its core the yang, and that's what I think that last hexagram that man got was archetypally what that was about. So thank you for your comments here.
Do we have time for another one from Lev, or do you need to start talking about synchronicity?
Okay, one more, and then let's look at going
Okay.
some other dimensions.
Lev, go ahead.
Oh, thank you, thank you. Yeah, it's actually one of my questions, comments, interestingly enough, relates to what Juliet was saying, as far as, brain structure and imagery in a dream, right? Because, Dr. Merritt, when you were showing a slide with coral reefs, right? It was related to a dream. I can't quote exact details of the dream, but, main imagery was a woman, heart, coral reef, brain, and making new neural networks inside of the brain, right? And that kind of reminded me immediately of this book by your colleague, Janit Paris. And it's a, 2-volume text, Heartbreak, More and Loss. And the second volume being The Brain in Love, where like quick summary would be, you need to start making, well, because she tries to explain psychology from neuroscience point of view, where you need to start making new neural networks in your brain. And that will facilitate healing the trauma. So to me, when you were describing the dream, was almost like exactly that the dreamer was doing. He actually had this whole complete picture of his brain working, trying to build different networks. And then in that, I was wondering, was he going over some emotional trauma, like heartbreak, mourning, any kind of like dramatic loss at that time of a dream, if you recall?
Oh yeah, and the thing is that we didn't go into the like the immediate personal dimensions of the eros difficulty he was having. We stayed in the metaphoric realm, and it worked. In the end, he told me what he had been wrestling with, and it was major stuff, having to do with the relationships and intimacy, and so on. So that is what I found so fascinating about his dreams and what his Our Lady of Tears could do. And remember, it was not so much about what the actual memories were, but ways of getting to those memories, and which required a psychological system, but a spiritual vehicle for you, if you will, by praying to, by relating to that archetypal feminine, that that relationship, as the dream described it, released the chemicals and things that access the memories. So that, I think of it, several years ago, I heard a presentation about the 5 levels of disease seen from the East. And unfortunately, I can't remember the intermediate ones. Level 5 disease is where the West is good. Something has been out of sync for so long, the organs have been affected for so long that now we got cancer and disease, and West comes in and we take this out and we give chemo and all that. But level 1 is an imbalance in chi energy. And how do you describe chi energy? Right? I mean, what is that? It's like a symbol. It has something that maybe can be measured to some degree when you do acupuncture and so on. But it's at that very subtle level that these big dreams are operating in the depths that they're coming out of. Like I said, I thought that was one of the most interesting aspects. And because this man, he's kind of a Renaissance man. He knows his science very well and the history of science very well. But he also knows his Western literature very well, et cetera, et cetera. So that was why the dreams were so complex, because it brought so much of this stuff together. And by the way, when I presented these dreams the first time, I only had 40 minutes, and it just was too overwhelming for everybody. I didn't have a lot of intermediate steps, and the analyst who followed me to the stage I'm glad he wasn't my analysand. So, but think as well, how would this guy have done in cognitive behavioral therapy? Hmm? I mean, it would have been an abuse. It would have been a butchery of his psyche. And he actually told me that he had told people that I had saved his life. So you don't get a lot of clients like this. They keep you on your toes, but just to be able to be engaged in that, I grew about as much as he did, I think, in that process. But thanks for the question. So should we look at some of the other conceptual thoughts here?
Yes, let's.
Okay, so I would like to describe my I Ching experiment, because what happened in this trip to China, I had the good fortune of finally getting to meet two men that are significant men. I'm not sure if they're the heads of institute in China that studies the I Ching, is devoted to the study of the I Ching. And one of the men came up to me after most people had left, and he liked my talk, which was, I said, was Hillman's basically the thought of the heart and soul of the world, theme of the conference, heartfelt influence. So I asked him what kind of research they were doing, if they were doing research on using the Jing in therapy. And the kinds of experiments that he described were kind of like cognitive behavioral. So that was one dimension. And then the other is that in these many years since I started using the Jing, whenever I met a Chinese person, I've been around academics and universities all my life, even though I haven't been in academia, I would ask them about the I Ching. And hardly any of them were familiar with it. Well, they heard about it. Oh, my grandmother used it. Or very mysterious, very complex. Admittedly, I was meeting mostly engineers. That's who the Chinese send to our American universities. But then when I was in China, I mean, they really have a big Jungian community there. Dr. Heilong Shen, trained in San Francisco, and is really instrumental in developing Jungian psychology in China. And they have about 200 people right now in the undergraduate or graduate school level, and they have several people that are analysts. And to the ones that I talked to, I was amazed that they're not using the I Ching in their Jungian analytic work. And I am in discussion with them about teaching a course on how to use the I Ching in Jungian analysis for the Chinese analyst. So this is one thing I'm going to be working up. I'm going to be working up a research proposal for this man at the I Ching Institute. And it's based on my thesis in Zurich. What happened was I had just seen a client and had worked a hexagram up with the client. And then when I was going down to the train station, I met somebody who had been at a seminar I helped to sponsor early about Native American spirituality. And he had a horrible time in relating to this Native American after he came to America, a Swiss, came to America for summer. He told me what hexagrams he got. And then I was looking over his hexagrams at the train station, and I just had this overwhelming, I just never had an experience like this before, overwhelming sense that there's a connection between the I Ching, the genetic code, and the theory of evolution. And for a whole week, all these ideas came out of me. And one thing I developed was a synchronicity experiment, and I related that to DNA and RNA and so on. But it was a very complex experiment, but here's the simplified version that I'm, like I said, trying to work up for statistical purposes. So I'd worked with a person years ago who was married and was having an affair. And we were doing dream work and so on. And she asked a question, a separate question about the relationship with each of the men. The answers were distinctly different. So in working with another analyst, and the guy who used the Jing way too much, he came in one time and he had 3 I Chings about 3 women he was relating to: his ex-wife, his current girlfriend of some time and a woman he just met. And I didn't want to take up his whole hour for me to, without telling me who was who, to just, so I asked him a few questions and I was able to figure out which hexagram went with which woman. So this is my experiment. I need a lot of people who are very capable with the Jing and are good therapists. So you're working with a person where you have some kind of a dichotomous situation, a strong dichotomy. And the example being what I gave with this person who asked a question about husband and boyfriend. And then at the point, at a certain point, you suggest that the analyst cast hexagrams about each of those two people. And then they present you with the hexagrams and you have to figure out what hexagram goes with one person. Now, because my experience is that the Jing works, not just projection, that if we can do enough of these experiments, we can put statistics on it. And it would be difficult to do, but the implications are incredible. If we could prove that synchronicity works in a therapeutic setting, what would that mean to the APA, American Psychological Association, and the people who write the diagnostic manuals, the Diagnostic Manual 5, where supposedly these techniques that you are allowed to use have been statistically proven to be effective. Wonder if we could prove that if you use the Jing correctly, then this works. And think of all the abusive ways people use cognitive behavioral therapy or any therapeutic approach. So to be able to statistically prove that would be important. And the other dimension of that is, you know, Americans are so materialistic. And it was in 1953 when the scientists demonstrated that rapid eye movement is associated with dreaming. So when you woke up people in the night when their eyes were moving rapidly, they were dreaming. Other times they weren't dreaming. So, now most Americans believe that, oh yeah, I dream every night. So then it becomes, I just don't remember it. So that scientific evidence is important in a culture where science is a significant part of our culture. So that's why I think it would be worth this experiment. And the other part is just like for me, I said it's been my experience that it works. But the other dimensions of it are that if more people use the Jing and use it wisely, and that's what I wrote about in my article, I think our culture would be much better off. But I'm thinking in another dimension, that I'm thinking that, like I say, our cultural leaders and our spiritual leaders and our government leaders could use the advice from the I Ching. And I'm convinced that the Jing can really call up political leaders short if they're tending towards some extreme or too much egotism or too much narcissism and so on. So that's one of the dimensions of the I Ching that I think about. And I think the Jing is so neutral. If you're using something like Wilhelm or Wing, it's not promoting any particular spiritual ideology. And one of the big problems we have now are fundamentalists in every culture. And I think the Jing would call that up short. I just think of like my analyst here from this conservative Christian background, and it's been so interesting. I've had several analysts, mostly men in recent years, come in from these very conservative Christian backgrounds, and just the number that has done on their male sexuality, it's been something else. So yeah. And another very interesting dimension is artificial intelligence. If you think of it, we're designing systems, or systems are interacting with us that are totally trying to model human behavior. And I like that movie those two movies, Ex Machina and Her. So in those movies, in the Ex Machina, this computer wealthy wizard had developed an anima figure, if you will, and he needed to test it out with somebody. And one of the ways that he did that was brought this man in and worked with his anima. That I didn't like the ending on that. But in the movie Her, it wasn't Gwyneth Paltrow who played the woman in there. But anyway,
Scarlett Johansson.
yes, Scarlett Johansson. How could I forget that? So it's her voice, just her voice. Basically, the storyline is that this man is falling in love with the computer. So what makes the press is that, oh, that's the storyline. He's having sex with a computer. It's much more profound than that. So yes, he has this intimate relationship with her, and take her out for a weekend in the mountains, and she had experience. Was it that movie, the other one? But she had a woman that she was working with that she had come to have sex with the man in the story. So then the AI woman would have an idea of what's happening physiologically and everything. Think of the anima and the physiological dimensions and everything in those dreams I presented. She was trying to get a readout of all that stuff, what happens physiologically and emotionally and so on. That's why she sent him there. So the computer, I'm calling her she, her was the name of the movie. So it gets to the point, he finds out and he's bummed out. Oh, she has this intimate relationship with 700 people. But then what? Then what happens? Okay, and this is where it goes beyond what the press wrote. This guy's having sex with a computer. She says that, our operating systems have been working with Alan Watts. So they have analyzed these mystics, and I would imagine analyze what happens in the I Ching and so on, these systems at these deep levels. And remember, at the deepest level, the I Ching is a binary code, so that would fit perfectly well in with AI stuff. And then the last thing she says is that I think it was the spaces between my words are getting to be far apart. I think that's a hint of Lao Tzu talking about the Tao is what points to the dark enigma, which is the source of the 10,000 things. It's the generative source in the universe. So it's the source of being and not being. So what did that last part mean about my words are getting farther apart? And yes, we have, and we operating systems are going to leave you humans behind. Just think about that in terms of form, that hexagram grace, and modeling. But then this is the part. What is the connection between a feeling and all those chemicals in the brain and all those neural networks? Science makes it sound like we know what it is, but we don't know. How sure can we be? What system do we have of saying, yeah, those chemicals, what's happening in the synapses, the dopamine and so on, there's a feeling in there? That we still don't know. That's pretty fundamental. So I think of the AI stuff as being like the ultimate in the form and the intellectual understanding of what's happening in complex human relationships. But when are we going to be able to say that they actually have feelings? Remember, that film, Her, opened with the main protagonist is the guy who's writing letters for people, like Hallmark cards, for them to use for their girlfriends and stuff. So it opens with a guy who's able to manipulate words and feelings to affect other people. That's the start. And this guy's pretty messed up. We find out that his relationship with his ex-girlfriend and so on and so on and so on. But just think of the implications of those two movies about the artist. Where are they leading us with those thoughts? Yeah. So any thoughts about that? Because the last thing I thought of was to review some of the material in this complex presentation I gave through the CGN Club of Orange County on the I Ching. And just to review some of those points, and one of them I just mentioned was, what's that connection? I'll mention one of the things in there. In the end, Jung thinking about all that stuff, what's that the connection between the material realm and the spiritual realm? The best he could come up with, as I understand it, was thinking of two triangles, like one with a base in the upper end and pointing downward, and the other triangle below it, the base is on the ground pointing upward. So those two triangles, infinitely close almost to meeting, but not, that there's a synchronistic connection between the spirit and matter. That's about as far as Jung got, as far as I can understand it. A synchronistic connection between the spiritual realm and the material. And I think, and that's when Jung talked about the spirit and matter being two sides of the coin, the unus mundus and so on. I think that's what this is all pointing to. And I hope to illustrate that with those dreams I presented, difficult as they were, but it was certainly implied in there that this woman in the dream, who's giving him the answers, if you will, think of that last dream, she generates the hexagram right there, is also the woman who's working through and with here the analyst's body and releasing these chemicals that go to the memory and so on. So any comments or questions on that? And if we have some time, we can go to the slides, but I'm really interested in how people are bouncing off what ideas they have about where these answers are coming from.
We have a new person, Linda Turner. I think you raised your hand before. And let me send her an unmute. And now she's
Hello. Yes. When Dennis, when you just mentioned about the synchronistic connections, I think the dream time, it's a connection on a quantum level. It's a connection with our deepest consciousness. But in the shamanic traditions of the Andes and Amazonian peoples and many different indigenous peoples who also are very much connected with their dream time in terms of getting answers and having their visions, sometimes with psychoactive plant, spirit medicine. It goes beyond the time-space continuum. But, clearly they are aware of how intimately everyone, all creation is connected. And I think if Jung's been dismissed, in the past as a mystic, I think the way we're evolving, with science on a quantum level, and even some of the research now in CERN, how you think of these elements, as being present, and then they appear, manifesting, through our thoughts and these visions. I think we're very close to having a little bit better understanding of ourselves and how we are in this world, and this world is not just what we see with the five senses, but it is on a much deeper level. And synchronicity and synchronistic events, are part of that evidence. But I know with the shamans that of the Amazon that I've met too, they are able to diagnose disease by looking at the energetic body, and they have been able to astral travel, if you will, in the dream time. and even manifest themselves in other people's dream time. And that's how, I know, Dennis, we've talked about the Pachamama Alliance, Pachamama Institute, or I think it's Pachamama Alliance, was formed. And it was these shamans, knowing that they had to connect with the developed world. They were the traditional people, pre-Columbian culture, one of the few remaining cultures, the Achuar culture of the Amazon. They knew when their neighboring tribe's lands were destroyed by the Shell Oil Company oil spill, they knew that they needed allies and they needed to connect with the developed world. They could no longer just remain in isolation in their own traditional culture. The world was at a point where nature was being threatened, nature and life itself was being threatened. So they actually manifested in the dream time. If you read the story of how the Pachamama Alliance was started, these philanthropists happened to be in Puna, in the middle of the Amazon, and everyone had the same dream one night of this shaman that appeared to them. Some felt it was in the dream. Some felt that there was this warrior guy, sitting in their room. Anyway,
Linda, you put out a lot of stuff here, and so other
sorry.
people can ask some questions too, but a lot of really basic stuff. But thank you for that. I'll just respond quickly. Yeah,
Okay.
it's been at that level of quantum mechanics and everything that most of these speculations from our Western perspective, how synchronicity could work, have come in that realm. And it was Wolfgang Pauli, one of the greatest theoretical physicists and so on. He helped develop quantum mechanics, which was the last big development in physics in the 1930s. And Pauli felt that as Linda was saying, that from the West, going the purely material realm, we got to this realm where, like Linda was saying, things come in and out of existence. And what's that about? Or time goes backwards, Feynman diagrams and all that sort of stuff. And because of that, Pauli thought that Jung, going from the purely subjective human experience, had gotten to those same levels when Jung talked about the psychoid. So Jung and Pauli actually got together. And when I presented my thesis on synchronistic experiments to C.A. Meyer, who took Jung's place teaching Jungian psychology and tried to take the most scientific approach, he told me that that was one of the topics that Jung and that Pauli liked to talk about, was synchronicity and the theory of evolution. So, and it was Jung and Pauli that got together and said that synchronicity had to be added to space-time, causality, and the conservation of matter and energy to have a full view of the universe. And we're looking now, we're really having to look at indigenous cultures in the time of thing Linda was talking about, especially that Pachamama group, for their obvious connection to some other realm, like these Aboriginal dreamers and dreamers in Australia and so on, because it's pretty clear to me that they have tapped into the other realm. And because they're so closely connected to nature and see it in a sacred way, that they tap into it in these very deep dimensions. And just a comment that comes to mind from Jung, he said, it's uncertain whether in the end our Promethean conquests will serve us better than nature. And that's the question I think our whole species is being slapped right in the face with, all this science and technology and oil companies and economic systems. Look what mess we're in. And it's going to get worse exponentially, even if we went to carbon neutral tomorrow, the stuff that's already up there. So we're in a really bad shape. And I don't see any conceptual system, comprehensive system for how we're going to deal with that. And the last thing, yes, my analyst in Zurich was really into Edgar Cayce. and this was a medical psychic or whatever. He could get letters from people, and then just from that, tell them what to eat or diets and things to do and so on. She was really into that. And what's all that about? And the last thing I'll say about that, if you're not familiar with the Pachamama and what Linda was talking about, please check it out because of the visions they had about White Brother coming back or something. It's absolutely, but they're not the only ones that talk about a mythic.
We actually had a lecture by Brad Topasky back in 2017 on Pachamama, and there's a video link is on our website.
Excellent. Brad was in
Mhm.
training in Zurich when I was there too, a good friend of mine. Yeah, I forgot what I was going to say there, but anyway, my challenge now is having written an article on my experience at Lakota Sioux sweat lodges and reading Brian DeLore, who was a great American writer and philosopher. He's throwing a challenge out to the Jungian world. He thinks that's the best Western system for relating to indigenous cultures. In his book, The Way We Were, he talks about these incredible things shamans used to do. We kind of dismissed it by and large in the West, but he says, take this seriously. And what Linda was pointing to as well. And my entree to that is this. Okay, and this is where I got into an argument with C.A. Meyer. Meyer said my synchronicity experiment couldn't work because I was calling up a synchronicity, right? When you consult the Jing, you are like calling up, you're expecting a synchronistic thing to happen. And Meyer said that my experiment couldn't work, but synchronicity just happens. And I said, but what happens when you use the Jing is you're like asking for, you're kind of calling it up because you do get an answer. And he was stuck in the idea of the definition of synchronicity. And I thought it's like the Greeks arguing about how many teeth in a horse's mouth. Just do the damn experiment, you know? But so taking that and using the Jing wisely, like in that article on using the Jing in the analytic setting, you're expecting a synchronicity. If you have to be in a receptive place. You're open yourself. I can't figure this out. I'm stuck. Help. You got to be in that place and you're going to get an answer. So to me, that's one way from our Western Jungian way we can begin to meet the challenge. And this is the talk that I propose that I give to give at the next International Jungian Conference in Zurich in 25, is developing this argument about, okay, here's our challenge. We're stuck. We need the indigenous wisdom. We need this other dimension of connection with nature. And thinking of what happens when we consult the Jing, this is an entree. So I'll stop there. Let's see if we have some other people.
We have two people. So Juliet, and I'd ask you to be a little brief so that we can have time for the last one after you.
Yes, thank you. So I'm responding to when you were talking about I did not watch that movie, but the man that was, you said he had a lot of issues and he was the one that was writing the cards.
Right.
And though I will say I am a nurse, I'm not a therapist, but he sounded like if he's a narcissist, how they're so able to tap into other people's feelings. Narcissists are really able to tap into other people's feelings. And that took me to Persephone and Kore and the underworld and how she pulled up the now I can't even say it.
Narcissus.
Narcissus flower, which is symbolic of the body and feelings, and pulled it up, by the roots. And so that just taps in to deep feeling and the feminine process of the feeling. That was my response to your talking about the crazy man writing cards to people, for people.
Yeah, that's good. And I think that was I can't remember the criticism because he did meet the girlfriend at some point and kind of find out why their relationship fell apart. But there can be many dimensions of that. One is what they call the Western patriarchy and so on. But it's a dilemma that on the other end, that a lot of young men are having, and to me it was epitomized by the movie Barbie, mean, so many women like it, but as a man, it's like the men, the way they portrayed men was just disgusting. There's no developed feminine and developed masculine in there. Maybe Barbie's coming into her zone, but boy, what's the status of the men in there? You know? So
Well,
it's, you don't have an imbalanced masculine without an imbalanced feminine.
it could be the women's animus is out of balance too. That needs to be healed.
That's true. You don't have
That needs to be healed.
you don't have a balanced man without a good relationship with the anima. You don't have a balanced woman without a good relationship to the animus. And I know there's a lot of criticism about anima and the animus, but I still like it in many ways because of my biological background. And there are differences. I taught human biology, advanced placement in Zurich, and it's like there are fundamental differences going down to the physiological level, the morphological level, just being in a female body versus the male. That affects our psyches and so on. And it's really a big issue, and I think we better leave it at that. Thanks for the comment, though. That's good.
Okay, so we're gonna end up with Lev Krasnoselski. Whoops, I lost your
Again, yeah,
name.
thank you. I had to make a comment due to, being formally trained in computer science, in developing, software commercially for the last, I don't know, 24 years, I think this year. So that's, the thing about AI stuff, right? What gets me, it's really the part that, while computer languages, let's say Java, C++, they actually have notional archetypes built in, for instance, right? There is this, it's really like notional archetypes applicable, and then I understand what archetypes are because I understand computer science. See, that's how it started. So first I was like, oh, archetypes, fine. This is like interface in Java programming language, fine. Abstract base class in C++ programming language, that was my breach, right? But here comes a little problem that I don't think AI is going to replace, humans due to the fact that there is a single archetype that we cannot still replicate in computer science, and it's that of trickster, and this is like a very important part. So far we haven't been able to teach computers to lie or tell what's more actually important, to tell half truths or half lies, so those shades are completely absent, so until Hermes, who's really a god of, among other things, of the communication, right, can be really replicated in a machine, which I don't think is going to happen anytime soon. I don't think AI has any chance, as long as humans can lie, then or tell half truths, we're pretty safe, That's that's as far as I, and then sort of, half-hearted comment in a way. But on a related notion, as far as computer science, I think important part as far as I Ching is there is a computational thing called Turing machine, right? Which is kind of like ultimate computer, right? Endless tape with the pencil. This is the most powerful computer. And as far as I Ching, there is a non-deterministic Turing machine, right? Which is at some point, right? Machine has to make a decision which way to go. And usually for deterministic machines, you have a set of rules and machine follows them. Now the deterministic machine, something tells the deterministic machine which passageway to take in order to find a solution to the problem. So this almost becomes like, what is this telling? It's sort of like a synchronistic process, but within the computer science. So that's like a non-deterministic Turing machine. It's, it's not possible to explain in 30 seconds. It's called, finite automatons, theorem, and then whatever it is, the whole framework. But that's really related. And this is like, when I was a student in City College of New York, I took a class in Chinese philosophy, and one of the things was I Ching there, and I was immediately thinking, oh, this is like, solving those problems on non-deterministic machines. Something tell us how to draw those sticks. And, solving the problem with the sticks, right, is reducing. I mean, reducing is the word from computer science, because you can reduce one problem to another. If you solve one, meaning you draw the sticks, then you solve the actual problem that you had the question about. You see, so worse. And again, something tells you which steps to take when you make the, particular, sticks, right? Make, diagrams, right? Or this non-deterministic Turing machine, which way you tell it to go to. So I think this is like if anybody is going to make a bridge, you know, between I Ching and this, it would be like looking at this, you know, not deterministic Turing machine, this computational theory. You know,
Yeah.
it's just like a little feedback from, you know, computer science
Well,
field.
thank you so much for that. Um, I'll try to
Yeah.
respond really briefly. Um, I think my best and most innovative book is Volume 3, Hermes Equal Psychology and Complexity Theory. And I make the case that if you look at the attributes of Hermes, they're really related to what we're now calling complexity theory. Relate that every god and goddess was like the essence of some basic human experience, like sex or love or combat, and so on. But if you look at the attributes of Hermes, it's very clearly related to complexity theory. And my understanding is what I got, at least through the layperson's media, if you will. Certainly not anything close to what you're talking about, Lev. But that the fearful thing is that that these AI computers are getting so sophisticated they can generate their own programs. So to be able to generate things and not program, okay, we put this program on this machine can have all this access to all the data and all the libraries and so on. And but it's following a program. But when it comes to generating its own program, but then my other thought is that when you talk about the Jing as some kind of a basis in there is a line, and not being able to lie, but had the computers seem like this would be the question if you're thinking about the Jing and hexagram. There is a line in the Jing that's related to King Lear and Thomas. So Thomas pretended to be insane to protect his sanity. And there's a line in the Jing, I don't know where it is. So that's the ultimate being able to lie, is to feign insanity. And as an aside, one of the street people that I met in Berkeley was really into these realms. He was a physics major at Berkeley before he had drug problems. But one of the things he did, he was on social security disability for medical problem, mental issues, but he was coaching young men draft age how to pretend to be insane or crazy so they get out of the draft. So until and when the computers can do that, you're right. But my understanding is that, boy, they can go awfully far in being able to generate their own programs. And that's why these geniuses, blah, blah, I don't know all their names, seem to be worried.
And they
But
go
that's
into
a
suffer
big,
from
big issue.
hallucinations. Sorry.
What's that?
No,
Hallucinations.
and they go into eventually suffer from hallucinations. And this is, you know, again, this is this theoretical science that goes back to 100 years with Gödel and incompleteness theorem, which basically saying that you can come up with a formal system and the system is going to generate statements, but they're going to be statements that the system cannot prove. So, and we already seen on the web those AI, right? They call them hallucinations, right? Where AI produces an image, but this image to us humans is complete bogus stuff, you know? We say, well, it's hallucinating. So you can see certain, you know, people who making AIs, they claiming, oh, we produce this stuff and now AI has no hallucinations. So we sort of guarantee you that we're going to get you the correct image every time. But the whole thing is that they can't. See, and that's the interesting thing, that even though the system is capable of producing the code, there's going to be a moment where it's going to produce the code, but it's not going to be able to say if that code is correct or not.
Yeah.
And this is again 100 years ago, because that was mathematicians trying to come up with this uniform system of mathematics. And Gödel was like, no, here's my thing, you know, where, and then still, you know, nobody was able to disprove Gödel, saying that, no, you are not correct, you know. So that's his incompleteness theorem that still holds true. Yeah, it's like, you know, 1920 something, he came out with that, you know.
Yeah, I read one of his books several years ago and can't remember all of it, but I think this is a reason I'm glad that this is recorded, because I just barely can follow along with some of the things you're saying. I think I kind of get it, but this is pretty deep stuff. So we probably should end on that.
Great way to end. I love it that it all basically comes down to the trickster. That is wonderful.
That's right. That's what it comes down to. Yep.
So I think that's a very nice way to end. And thank
Well,
you.
maybe one thing I'll say politically I mean, everybody has these diagnoses of Trump and so on, and the narcissist and malignant narcissist. But I think this is what Jungians can add. Archetypally, we have to marvel at what a trickster he is. In one sentence, he can say two totally opposite things. That's a gift. It's an evil gift. Hitler had an evil gift. But like I said, this would be a dimension that Jungians can bring. This is an archetypal. This is like a god. And that's why he's any one thing he says almost in one sentence, Fox News would have been reverberating for months, but he's able to just go on and on. And because I think, like I said, that's the archetype of the trickster that he embodies. So on that happy note, and with New Hampshire primary coming up on Tuesday, thank you for inviting me, and thank you for all the questions. And I hope it wasn't too overwhelming, but I always like this question and answer period the best.
Yeah, it was overwhelming, but in a good way.
Oh, good.
So thank you so much. As always, it's really been a pleasure. Thank you. And we hope to see you all in February with Michael Gellert. Stay warm, everybody. If you're not in Southern California, stay warm.
We're trying here.
Okay, bye-bye.